Hello everyone, this is the AJ37. It is a rank 7 attacker for Sweden, but don't be fooled. Even though this Viggen is primarily an attacker, it also is a really capable fighter, with the correct loadout of course. This loadout is from left to right, gun pod, 2 RB24J, and a countermeasures pod. This loadout works well since you have a pretty decent gun, 2 decently capable missiles, and some flares. This variant of the Viggen is slightly different from the fighter variant, because it is about a ton lighter, since it doesn't have an inbuilt gun like the fighters, and it has a slightly weaker engine. However, its thrust to weight ratio is also higher, but only when you aren't carrying anything under the wings. The AJ37 has some decent flight performance, but it is very good for being at the battle rating of 10.3, since it is at 10.3 it usually is put between 10.0 and 11.0 in most matches, which means you can still face F5Cs. This plane is an 11.0 worthy airframe that sits at the battle rating of 10.3, which is quite annoying for any 9.3 planes, for example the F100D, Super Sabre, or the Ariete. There is also just a few more that you can face in the Viggen too. When dodging missiles, since this thing only gets a singular flare pod, unless you want to sacrifice a gun pod. However, since AIM-9Ls got nerfed recently, you can one flare them most of the time. But also, since the AJ37 is a Viggen, and it's at 10.3, it can dodge most missiles and just outpull them. But for some reason, the AJ37, even though being a strike fighter, it has basically the same radar modelled in game as the fighter variant. However, they did change the name in the X-ray view for some random reason, but still haven't disabled the air-to-air functionality because it was originally an air-to-ground radar, since it's an air-to-ground fighting plane. The AJ37 also, as I mentioned earlier, has a weaker engine, which is the Svenska Flygmotor RM8A, compared to the JA37's engine, which is the RM8B. The RM8A of the AJ37 has 6,610 kilograms of thrust without the afterburner, compared to the RM8B, which has 6,800 kilograms of thrust without afterburner. It's obviously more when the afterburner is on. The fuel consumption of the Viggen's engine is pretty rough. You basically need to take like 45 minutes of fuel to be running second stage afterburner constantly for the entire match. But then again, you might run out of fuel and still have to go and land before the match even ends, really. It's just mainly if you get a fast match or a slow match or an EC map or just a regular map. And yeah, if you take anything less than 45 minutes, you will run out of fuel and die. It would be nice if you could join the Discord server, since I'd like to see it grow, and it's just in the description if you would like to join. The Viggen has a really good top speed of 1,925 km an hour at 11 km altitude, without anything on it. But even though that the stat card may not be true, it still can get to just below Mach 1.1 on the deck. This is very good because you can just flare once and run, and no one can do anything about it. But that's only if you keep your speed. The acceleration is mid at best for this plane, but once you get going it's hard for people to 180 for you and launch a missile that will actually hit. When you're in an up tier, you should be quite a bit more aggressive towards the enemy, since they have well better missiles and way better flight performance. But in a down tier, you can basically just stay at altitude and just launch missiles from space and come down behind A10s and A6Es, since they're quite slow compared to you, especially on the deck. And your missiles, even though being AIM-9Js, they have okay flare resistance, and they pull okay as well, but if you can get behind someone and they don't know that you're there, they just die. A few things that can outrun you are the F4Cs and F4Es if you get up tiered, but if they're carrying bombs, they just won't be able to get up to the speed that you go. And F104s, like the F104A, used to be quite a bit higher, but now it's at like 9.3, so you only face it if you get a full down tier. And it's still pretty fast, even for 9.3, but it doesn't maneuver nearly as well, and it only gets aim 9Bs instead of aim 9Js, and it's just like not the best plane. You can basically do anything better than it, especially since you accelerate decently about the same rate as they do. Even though there are radar missiles at this tier, I wouldn't be that scared of them, because if you're fast you can just dodge them, since they're like pretty basic radar missiles. They're not like AIM-7Fs or AIM-7Ms, but you can just run away from most of them, and that's why you should only really take flares in your flare pod, in your countermeasures pod, instead of taking flares and chaff, because then if you take chaff, you also reduce the amount of flares you can use, and flares are quite important for the massive afterburner you have at the back. And that's the end.